And peace. Still got to do the mic check and all that. Interesting storyline that we put together today. Play it one time, let a couple folks come through, and then we'll jump into it. All right, peace, everyone. Let's see. Leave at that moment of silence, but then jump into it. So, one of the stories that I was reading, I jumped right into it. Investigators are looking for a motive. It's unclear what the motive was. Authorities say they believe the shooter acted alone. That got my attention. The reporting there says um, a lot about nothing until that point. At this point, I can tell you we do not believe, we do not believe there's any connection to any domestic or international terrorism, the FBI's Combs said. And so, because it got my attention in the first part, I was like, okay, let me read more. So we get to this part. But he said he acted alone. It wasn't connected to international terrorism or any domestic or international terrorism. They do not believe. And so, at least that affirms that they're doing some form of investigation. I don't know if I'm satisfied with that. I don't know if I'm content with that response. Um, like I often do, I question it. I got a lot of questions. So let me run this back with one more again. Here you go. Multiple active shooter scenarios occurring here in America. What do we do? Stay tuned. We the people. First thing that stands out, always about gun rights, right? Gun rights, gun rights, gun rights. It's going to be a very common conversation. And it's always been an interesting conundrum for us as we look back over history and as we look into modern times. Even the surrender of Lord Cornwallis was another one of those instances where what you do with your arms becomes important. That was about the Confederates. You still have that even today. Charlotte's riots. I think I got it as a derivative of one of the elders who said murder cults. I think that was Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, maybe, who said low aim is sin. Hold on to those. Because when the military cannot arrive on time to protect, more citizens will seek advanced training in weapon systems and weapon systems. Why? Because it's the American murder code, man. There's some weird fascination with these weapons of mass destruction. There is no cure for violence, especially when you're bred on Lucky Luciano. And statements like this really got my attention, right? And so if you'll see the thumbnail, it was one of the presidents from back in the 60s. And, you know, they hunt, they do all of those things. But this one, where there are views on gun control across presidential administrations. This one was an interesting view for a certain period of time. I know it was the 80s, so I was alive, but let's see. It says, you won't get gun control by disarming law-abiding citizens. There's only one way to get real gun control. Disarm the thugs and the criminals, lock them up, and if you don't actually throw away the key, at least lose it for a long time. It's a nasty truth, but those who seek to inflict harm are not fazed by gun controllers. I happen to know this from personal experience, and that was Ronald Reagan. Part that stands out the most to me is disarm the thugs and the criminals. We know that we have been the ones locked up for the longest, but if this is the image that our media portrays of what a thug and a criminal looks like, then they have to be short-sighted. Pun intended. Can't blame anyone but Kevin Hart, man. What happened to Kevin Hart? I was on Twitter and I was just checking it out. And so what this stream is going to do is present some of the opinions or perspectives of those who chimed in about this particular mass shooting incident that happened there in Odessa, driving, or I think it hit like 3 towns. He was just driving, or small towns, on a road, just on a shooting spree. Originated the shooting spree with police officers who were pulling him over for a ticket. And then from there, it just got horrible. But today, while I was on there, as you see, September 2nd, 2019, Kevin Hart suffers major back injuries in car crash. One of my favorite comedians. Definitely know him to be as hood and as approachable and relative as most. Confirmed even on his Instagram. I added some more muscle to the family. My 40th welcome home menace. Muscle car lover. Can only blame Kevin Hart for that. Also in the news, you got Dave Chappelle. Not an act of freedom, but it more or less was an expression of an act of freedom on his new stand-up Netflix, available on Netflix, called Sticks and Stones comedy. Multiple active shooting scenarios. See, now we have to respect blue lives because blue lives matter, but do not cross that police line. There is a line you don't cross. The mass killings should be one of them, but unfortunately, we're left with more questions than answers. Excuse me, and thank you. Here we just have old data, which has to be updated. And even as you update that data, you can see the size of those circles, and then they can get even more accustomed to looking at the maps and then present more viable information. And here's why. Scenarios like Sandy Hook, the massacre on December 14th, 2012 in Newton, Connecticut, where 28 were killed, including that perpetrator. Continue to fly the flag, continue to mourn, but when it comes time for evacuations, we ought to have more questions than fears. We ought to have more questions than tears, and they ought to be able to provide that information or those answers, especially in those incidences of like natural disasters or something like that, where they're evacuating and things. Those plans shouldn't be as we have to give them to you, but I think it's almost beholden upon each individual to have somewhat in mind a plan. And I was watching something a little bit earlier. E-Trades had a commercial while I was over at the dentist, and that commercial cracked me up. But it was about a whole lot of dogs, and there were some smiling, like every breed of dog that there is. And at the end of the commercial, E-Trade was like, it was the poodles. I can't tell the whole story, but at the end of the commercial, let me know if you see it. But at the end of the commercial, it was like, some people have dogs who live better than you. And I thought it was just hilarious. But why more? When people have dogs that can live better than human beings, there is probably a disconnect in our priorities, right? There's probably some brainwashing that doesn't allow everybody to become the type of brave or courageous, I protect my community individual, not alert, not always cognizant, not always disciplined. Maybe they're not in the best physical health. Maybe they're just not even interested. But why do we celebrate heroic moments from ordinary people? Why? Because there are situations here in America where heroism is needed. And if there are more people who are prepared to be heroic in those moments, I don't know. I think it takes more than just being brave. I think that it also requires some real commitment. Why? Because gun control isn't about guns. It's about control. Why do we even want to talk about control right now? Because without having a conversation, you're just left with people who walk around and try to make the decision for themselves in an environment that's already racially charged, socially charged, economically charged, and politically charged. And so you would have to get to this conclusion or this question: is this the solution? I kind of like how it's written backwards. No, it is, you los. So let's get to the information. And I think this is where the music cuts off and we start to have our conversation. Thanks for everybody that joined real quick. Let me check and see, give some shout outs. Hopefully there is one or two. And if not, we will keep going. Nope, not near one, but we shall keep going. Hopefully they pick up as the notifications get sent out. And so on the report, the first part that stood out to me here is that they don't know the motive, so they can go over the history. They said he only had one Facebook post with a small picture on it. They still would have to go through the carbon dating or the carbon footprint or the whatever it is, the online footprint, and see if there's anything there. If their first order of business was to establish this individual's motive. I don't know how many people at the department it takes to actually work on such an initiative and how fast they need that answer, his motive, because I do believe he is already dead. The second sentence, authorities say they believe the shooter acted alone. Now, this belief is established or predicated on what? If you've only found the one Facebook post, then there must either be more information available that just wasn't pertinent to be shared with the media at the time, or it's an assumption, and it's an assumption that is not proven yet in the eyes of the public. To make the assumption or your belief that they acted alone, I guess would require at least some review of the footage. If there is an availability of footage along that highway, or if there is some way of finding that footage that that department may have access to. Now, that is one of those areas that is not pertinent to be shared information, whether it's using telecommunications to ping the phones and then linking those to fiber optic cables, satellite, whatever it may be, to paint a more fuller picture of whether or not this person acted alone. And I don't think that you can limit that information or that query to just the moments that they were an active shooter. Next part. Oh, my bad. Let me run it back. Yeah. At this point, I can tell you we do not believe. So first they told us what they believed is that they acted alone. So that during the duration of that entire road trip where he was just spraying and shooting, at one point hops out and kills a like UPS delivery driver, takes that vehicle as well. And they have cell phone of that incident that is also available. But what I'm doing here is looking at the information that's been provided by FBI's Combs and then asking some of those questions or giving at least a critique that builds up to the actual question. So I guess my question would be here, how do you know what you believe? And how do you know what you do not believe? What are these assumptions predicated upon? If it's data, what kind of data and information is actually available to make this connection? So it says they do not believe there's any connection to any domestic or international terrorism with this isolated incident or with this person or with their network, maybe their ideology, their influence. It's almost to say that they're not a part of a sleeper cell. You know what I'm trying to get to? A witness describes the shootout with officers. So I remember seeing that very first footage of the person who was like behind a car or something that was a great distance away. Most important inside of the report, it was like, okay, so now that you know this, what are you doing about it? And that alluded to this topic. New Texas gun laws to go into effect Sunday. The shooting happened hours before a series of firearm laws went into effect in Texas, where 4 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings in modern U.S. history have happened. 40% of the deadliest 10 shootings in modern history. U.S. history, that is. The new measures will loosen gun restrictions and allow weapons on school grounds, apartments, and places of worship. And after the shooting Saturday, Democratic presidential candidates issued statements calling for gun reform. One of the interesting connections there that I didn't say in the initial while I was reading theirs is on this lower end, you'll see the NRAP. And those were major weapons of war post 9/11. And the irony is we now need those to patrol our streets or to respond after an incident. That this MRAP may need to be full of people willing to engage in an armed conflict. And they're moving from Bridgeport to overpass, closing off exits for 30 minutes straight at least. That's one of the questions that I would have is how long was this entire event, this active shooting scenario that took the lives of so many? All right, so they go into the political ramifications of it. I typically don't like to do it, but I'll read it because it is here and available. Vice President Mike Pence said he and President Donald Trump are determined to work with Congress to address and confront this scourge of mass atrocity in our country. Sunday afternoon, Governor Greg Abbott commented on the frequency of high-profile shootings in his state since he took office. Interesting. He says, I have been to too many of these events, Abbott said. Abbott named several similar incidents: the Dallas shootings that killed police officers, the Sutherland Springs, then Santa Fe High School, then El Paso, and now Odessa Midland. Standard statement that he puts out is, I am heartbroken by the crying of the people in the state of Texas. I am tired of the dying of the people of Texas. Too many Texans are in mourning. Too many Texans have lost their lives. The status quo in Texas is unacceptable and action is needed. CNN's Ed Lavandera reported. And so we'll jump into some of the tweets. See what we have, see what's interesting, and see what we can build on. Getting all notifications. But I don't think there was many who got my notifications. So if there is one, shout out and salute. All right, peace. M.A.S.S 3, multiple active shooter scenarios, Texas again. So we just got done reading some of the statements from the political portion of it. We didn't go into the eyewitness testimonies. Those videos are available. I think there is at least two of those. One of the woman who lost her life, the UPS driver, was on the phone with like her sister, and her sister gives the testimony to that, as well as the person who was behind like a car while the shootings were going on. And so mass shooting there. Yep. Odessa. Questions would be, how long was the entire active shooting scenario? It was a whole bunch of people. It was an open highway, and then it connected like 3 or 4 towns. And I decided to speak on it today as a part of the M.A.S.S, multiple active shooting scenarios series that we have now, which I would love to never have to do another one of these again. But I digress. So we have a couple of them here, and I don't think I need the full screen to share these, but let's see. All right, so just going through the tweets from the top, 19 hours ago, 18 hours ago, see if there's anything interesting. Look like we got one that says, skip the trial, skip the wasted time, give them a public execution. If the guy did it, it's no need to have a trial. Make examples of these people. Karen Wynn says, how was he able to kill all these people? Weren't police in pursuit? Why didn't they shoot to kill like they always do when the brown person is behind the wheel? So that's interesting. I thought this guy was not taken alive. JLS1, don't tell me another white male who has easy access to weapons and war level firepower. Facts. As we know, in the El Paso, there was at the Walmart didn't really have a public statement about it, but 30% of the ammunition that is sold in America goes through Walmart. So definitely a good call out there. Let's see what else. Oh, I like this one. This one was interesting. The Wasteland Gemini, about 19 hours ago. What's great is that today, 9/1/19, the loosened gun laws in Texas take effect. So thanks a lot for those very empty words at Greg Abbott. So he actually hits up the governor in the tweet. If you were really tired of the gun deaths, you would not have become a puppet of the, and then he adds the NRA. Greg Abbott is bad for Texas is his hashtag. What I liked about his post, though, is that he actually went a step further and posted what the laws were that took effect today. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit better. You might, or at least I might be able to read it. But eyesight ain't that good. Nope, no zooming in available. Let me see. So, yeah, you're going to have to check it out for yourself. Check out the Wasteland Gemini. Definitely wanted to arm the schools, though. That is on the new law that took effect today in Texas. What stood out to me about it was I would agree with the Wasteland Gemini in his assessment that there was a lot of double talk that happened, and that double talk needed to be brought out as the two different positions on gun control or gun rights. And in this instance, what the laws essentially do when they highlight loosened the gun laws is it says by arming and having a more trained and prepared citizenry, I believe is how we would word that. Citizenry, citizenship, citizens. You get where I'm trying to go with that. They can combat or deter or intervene when the police can't, and the military will never be able to get there in time. They may be able to get somewhere along the way retroactively, and they may be able to deploy technologies and things that can start to mitigate, but the triggered, literally, and do mean it, pun intended, have all the time in the world to do what it is they're going to do. And it is in those moments where only the heroic and only the brave and effective, and I would hopefully incline to insert others like prepared and well-trained, are in a position to intervene. Long sentence, so I hope you're able to stick with it. The double talk is a pipe dream because there are armed citizens in Texas already. And even their ability to intervene may not protect the individuals who are in the path of destruction of these armed criminals. The triggered, the active shooter. And so if there is no key takeaway other than this one, are you prepared? Keep it rocking. I had spoke on something along this. So Florence Levy, shootings in Texas have put assholes into the state Senate and House that do not care about their citizens. These shootings will continue to happen if the citizens don't get together and rally. Go rally. I like how they started it, but then their call to action, go rally, I think is a lot less biting than stay prepared. A constant state of preparation. So I tried to bring it up here. Let's see. Yeah, this one does allow me to see it a little bit clearer. The laws that took effect Sunday will allow licensed handgun owners to carry weapons in places of worship, including churches and synagogues. Problematic. Go into the double talk. Number one, those churches and synagogues likely have armed and prepared people already there, or should. And if they don't, then that's not a decision for the state. That is the decision for the church. It's not up to them anyway. It's up to the pastor and the congregation. So you didn't need a law to say that. What makes it double talk then is that crazy kid in Charlotte, or in not Charlotte, but in Carolina, maybe South Carolina, I think it was, who went to the church and they embraced him with open arms, but turned out to be the active shooter, now has the same access to everyone there. And again, if it weren't for the heroic actions of those who are already a part of that congregation, then that just spreads and everything in there is just dead. And then it just moves on. That force that triggered gunman, it moves on.
And the rate of fire is it is such that that entire massacre is not, hours long. That would be demonic. It doesn't drag on for hours like the old bank robbery days of the mob movies and films. But the actual accurate, trained, triggered, and we can't tell the difference from them from anybody else. But that person doesn't need an hour. They don't need 30 minutes. They don't need 45 seconds, really, to be devastating. It's not the state, it's the people. The second bullet: ban landlords and homeowners from prohibiting tenants to own, carry, and transport guns on their property. That one, I don't like the word their property, because does the their refer to the landlords and the homeowners, or the renter, the leasee? So I live in an apartment. Am I now not able to carry inside of an apartment? Or are you telling those landowners who said this is a gun-free zone, we don't want guns in our apartments, or we will provide the armed security? Where does that go when you're saying there? Because if the landlords and homeowners, sorry, flip that. If the tenants were allowing a ban from the landowners and homeowners in the first place, that sounds like a problem of the people. That was already a problem of the men who already had those arms and the rights to carry. For a landlord or a homeowner, and you're their tenant, and they tell you, well, you can't have any weapons on this property to protect yourself, and they listen to that bullshit, that's on them. I think on the other end of that, what kind of fucking asshole landlord or homeowner is banning people from having their own forms of protection in their where they live and where they stay and where their children have to sleep at night? What kind of asshole is that in the first place? Let me find out that that is those Chinese landowners or lease, what I'm saying? How they own large tracts of land and they're not even Americans, and then they have the authority over the tenants of their properties to say you all do not have access to guns. What kind of America is that? And that's in Texas. Even in Texas, I wonder let me ask it more clear. Which percentage of those landlords and homeowners who ban tenants from owning, carrying, or transporting guns on their property, which percentage of those lands, those assets, are owned by foreigners, foreign investment, or even big companies like that own large tracts of land and all of that? Which ones are the mutual funds that actually own it? Which ones are just like large landowner, like, they have 50 or more properties, and on their properties they have this ban, or had the ban, and now they reversed it finally. I think I kind of like this one, to ban the landlords and homeowners from prohibiting them. I like it in one sense that, yeah, that shouldn't have been something that landlords and homeowners were able to get away with in the first place. And in some cases, that though still speaks to the quality of the men. If the men in those homes or those households were allowing themselves to be governed to that level of authority by those landlords and homeowners, then those men need to do a self-examination. So I kind of like that one on two ends. The next bullet: prevent school districts from prohibiting licensed gun owners, including school employees, from storing guns and ammunition in school parking lots, as long as it is not in plain view. I mean, that's weird to me. That just the way that that's worded, I think they really have to go in and really examine that in real life applications. When I see it, I see that big green bin that you used to be able to donate clothes to, and you never really knew when they were going to pick them up. So it's oftentimes in some of the less upkept places and communities, sketch communities, those big green, or sometimes they're even orange, where you could put clothes, that thing, like a public locker. I remember I never really had to use them, but there used to be payphone booths. And so if the government is talking about creating armories that allow you to lock, I think that's also for private business. Um, I guess if there is a renter's fee, kind of like how we have to pay to park our cars in some places, like that little quarter machine or gun machine, I think that it can be regulated. Um, and it's probably with those same little temporary quick locks that they already have available that could probably hold, a lot. I don't know. I kind of like it, but then I kind of don't. I'm torn on that one. I'm torn on it for its economic impacts. I think it may have an economic driver in there, a cost associated with the creating and even the standardized. I mean, it's a quick contract though. They just got to pick a make and model of the gun armory thing, automate it to where it can open and close, kind of like our vending machines where we buy chips and candy from, and then allow that space to be used. But that's where it gets tricky. So at the very end of it, it says as long as it is not in plain view. I don't get how that's a deterrent then. I think it has to be in plain view. I don't know. It's the double-edged swords, right? Because now even that same person, that triggered person, and again, it's about, if you can't prevent the mind state or the ideology or the weird infatuation with guns that Americans have, then you have to understand that this society is moving towards more guns in society, more access and more visibility. And if you can't prevent what somebody was saying in one of their tweets, the psychiatric or whatever it is that's impelling these folks to take these actions, um, then what do you do? Literally solution backwards, though. It's a backward solution. I don't know. Is it better than the status quo to have big lockers inside of our public education spaces that our teachers can access and members of the public school system and even some private schools? If they can't afford to have the armed guards there at all times, but they do have licensed teachers who are trained and able to, should it even be outside in the parking lot? The next bullet point struck home to me because it says allow foster homes to store firearms, and that one's interesting, and that can go a lot of ways in my mind. The foster homes, um, on obvious question, you couldn't already. All right, so there was a couple of more bullets for, so bear with us here. Prevent citizens from being charged for carrying a handgun without a license while evacuating or returning to a declared disaster zone. I think that one is universal every 50 states right now. If there is one that has some states' rights or federal rights, I think that one it should be federal mandate, not just a state. So I have, again, through the list, I have one that I think shouldn't be state. It should just be there. States' rights, it should be individual rights. So maybe that's a federal thing. The federal ban or the ban landlords and homeowners from prohibiting tenants. I think that should be a federal ban against landlords and homeowners. Um, yeah, yeah. Every citizen should have the right, and it's almost to the point of it's not just a right. We're not talking about rights no more. We're talking about those who, in many cases, would almost have a duty now. Like a veteran. How do you just like a veteran? Now you have a veteran tenant, and you're telling that veteran that they don't have the right to protect the community around them. Come on, man. I mean, and again, the dual-edged swords, right? Because the psychiatric or whatever that is condition of the people is always going to be a challenge. So that same person who could be a hero one day could actually miss his shot. And so you have citizens who are trained, who are armed, but yet the risk is still there of mass casualties. All right, so let me move forward. I had three more that I could have read, but I don't want to keep going too far into it. Let me back up about 10 seconds though. Yeah, so Florence Levy, appreciate that. But the Wasteland Gemini, once again, shout out for making that information and making that information available about the laws that actually took effect in Texas. Some of them could be federal laws, others could just be left up for the state. Some of them still, like I say, they challenge the man and they challenge the heart of the man. And so that's an area that we have an opportunity. So what else do we got? Yet no picture in the tweet like it would be if he was an illegal immigrant or minority, just a picture of the scene. Oh, and so that I kind of agree with the media on that sense. Don't show his face and all of that. Don't tell his story. You don't need his Facebook for individuals who want to see and do all of that. All right, sure. All of the victims for people who want to see the victims and all of that. All right, sure. I can guess how the media takes that approach. For me, my questions would just be in the pursuit and then the map. Show me the map. Show me the line that it was driven. The businesses that were hit. Recreate the scene and don't wait for some documentary years later to actually do it. But zoom in as you can now, recreate it, and make that information available for those of us who do have those minds and can learn from this even in our own individual or personally responsible personal accountability regiments on what does training, what does a bug out kit look like, what does disaster preparedness look like. For those of us who do take those things serious, we weren't in that scenario, and we know that our cities aren't in a position to just stage disaster scenarios to where everybody gets evacuated as a drill, like our public education and our school systems can do fire drills, and that those fire drills can actually start to incorporate active shooter drills now. But in that active shooter drill, there is also people or staff members who are also trained and may have a skill set, some veterans that may work in there, or just some people who have a proven certificate or something, those teachers who are trained. And a part of their drill is not to be the people with the, maybe it is to be the whistle, have the whistle, but they're moving intently and with a purpose, and every 8 seconds counts. And those bursts of three make every 8 seconds at least two bursts. And those bursts are actually the lives of the people that we may not even know but love. All right. So I like this one. It said, perfect. The new Texas gun laws to go into effect Sunday. So somebody else highlighted it again, and there was another story, and it provided a little bit more context. So again, thank those people who actually dropped links inside of their tweets, social media, Facebook, and things that are actually vital and critical. Things like that, not just the perspective, but actually the links and the information. Um, Let me see. Jim Lantoff. Here we go again. AR apparently used in Odessa slaughter. Our thoughts and prayers are with leadership of NRA and Moscow Mitch, as they will surely burn in hell forever for their crimes against humanity. Interesting. The Christian or the religious um, references that were included. You keep beating the AR up, though. It's taking a beating. The cops emptied the movie theater in the picture background and sent the people right into the heat of gunfire. Way to go, dummies. So that kind of information. So in our household, one of the types of movies or binge things that we do watch some of those cop shows, detective shows. Not many of the ones that are in Chicago, I gotta admit, but we do watch a lot of those. And so having that type of mind is helpful. I mean, but it's also probably the thing that creates that paranoid schizophrenia or hypervigilance in people, or it triggers at the very least the symptoms of PTSD. And so that active PTSD, or it never really leaves, could be useful. It doesn't mean that can't be caught lacking in those type of situations where I was just trying to enjoy a movie or something like that, and this is what was happening in the home. Oh wait, son, you're actually going to have to hold off on that. You can have a snack or something, but don't use the microwave. So no microwave noodles at this time. All right. A few more tweets here, and they're in three, and just looking at them. Let's see. Social media psychiatrists and politicians have already declared him mentally insane. That was one of the ones that stood out, and I've been referencing it a couple of times here. Peace and salute, man. I wonder why I can't see my YouTube. It normally gives me a little column where I can see the YouTube, but I can't see it. And then I wonder if I share this whole screen, will it share the whole screen? Because I don't think it's necessary to see me in many of these cases. It's just the information. But let's keep it rocking. So Mac the third, a heck of a comment right there, man. It is funny how some people turn into social media psychiatrists. So they instantly say, well, well, his childhood, what about his childhood? Others become politicians and they say, well, it needs to be gun rights and gun control. And so they want to go into some of these laws and different things. And they want to talk about it and they want to say, I'm kind of on that ladder. But on the bigger scene, though, I think more you'll find people on social media who just really don't care. And they'll see it and they may look at it for a couple of seconds and then they'll just keep scrolling. I think that's the overwhelming majority. So I'm taking a moment to acknowledge, in that same vein, they say, what about they declared him mentally insane. I don't know, but it is overused as an excuse. It's almost satire now. How that's one of the key areas that they want to look at is, was there a history of psychiatric illness? I think they use that to connect it with the argument that, well, if there is a history of psychiatric illness, then how was he afforded the access to guns to be able to make that purchase? Which is an argument that I absolutely 100% disagree with. And in fact, I think my disagreement is personal and on a broader scene or sense. I disagree that having sought help, whether in your adulthood or even in your childhood, is a criteria for restricting access to guns. I disagree because having sought help is a good thing. And we do not want to discourage people from seeking help. The impact on the industry would be devastating from an economic lens, but on a personal lens, not to be able to protect your own home is a travesty. And it should make a man examine himself. And in our society, though it is on the shoulders of the man, that training and preparation is extended to the wife and children. And then let me give you something a little bit harder. It's also extended to your neighbors, which is why be good to your neighbors. Be kind. What we've witnessed in shopping spaces, that's Gustafa in the homes or in our residential communities. Calling the police is a solution for retroactive support. I need help. But men don't like to say when they need help. They don't like to admit that they need help. And proactive men try to do things to not leave themselves at a disadvantage in armed conflict. I'll get back to the tweets though. Long rant, but that's where we're at. I gave you the information, and interwoven through will be multiple active shooting scenarios. M.A.S.S, Texas again is the topic. Right now, we're uncovering some of the tweets or getting some public opinion about it. 19 to 18 hours ago, one of the major stories that's probably not going to get a lot of media attention is that the laws passed, and those laws in Texas by Greg Abbott, the governor, were to loosen gun restrictions, make it easier, create more access and more freedom for gun owners in America, or in Texas is theirs. But there were at least 3 of those that I believe could be federal. One of them, the one that stands out to me, I didn't even know that it existed, but there are spaces where homeowners or landowners are banning their tenants from having the right to bear arms or transport or store guns on those properties. It just says their property. If I'm renting, I consider it my property and I consider myself responsible for the protection of those inside of that dwelling. That is my castle doctrine. I don't think that the people inside of those dwellings where they have a ban on being able to have arms, I don't think they have the luxury of being able to call that landlord and say, well, I need you to come faster than the police to protect me in the event of intruder or an active shooter is in the community terrorizing the little boys and girls or something, man. They're at the local school, which is walking distance away. And I hear the fires or the gunshots, but I do nothing. I get behind my own couch or jump under my sink or get in the bathtub type of citizens. I think men have to examine themselves, is what I'm saying. Somebody else says, I think we should examine the current president. And so they put a meme up that says, how much longer are we going to allow this thing to ruin? And I think when they're saying this thing to ruin would be either I think they're insinuating a failed administration or the American democracy itself. There's some bigger themes in there that they could be alluding to. But in any case, I would ask the question. Somebody else says, as a form of a question, Gary Delosier, how much longer until we do something about this? And so that's why the law passing and the irony of the law passing and the law that says loosen has to be something debatable. Do you agree? Do you agree that a more armed people in society is better? More spaces where those armed people have the freedom to carry is better. There was a ban. They used to say, don't let it inside the church. Don't bring that inside of our schools. Do not bring it, gun-free zones in like California where I grew up, but things like that, restaurants and things. Do you think that we need more armed people in society to see more ARs? Do you agree with the Governor Greg Abbott of Texas that the law should be loosened, that there need to be more spaces and more freedom for gun owners? Yeah, they would have to really explain this one. I did not understand this one at all. Maybe I'm just not in tune with the type of show it is, or the meme just went right over my head. But the one here, Michael Harrison says AR-15, probably. It's a very common weapon platform or weapon system. Somebody else, Mike Double G, we're almost every 2 weeks an active shooter in this country. Not worded the best, but then again, who am I to critique someone else on how they word their information? Sir Soap put the longer version of what he was referring to, Mike Double G. It was a message from just read it. FBI Special Agent in Charge Christopher Combs said his agency responds to Texas frequently. He said the FBI is here now almost every other week, supporting our local and state partners on active shooters. We're almost every 2 weeks an active shooter in this country. Interesting. I mean, how does he feel about that? Like, you could take it a lot of ways. Like, are the local and state partners incapable of defending its population, its citizenry, the residents, tenants, people just driving on its roads? Who is responsible for the protection of the citizens from active shooters? Is that a government's job or a government responsibility, or is that for the individual? I think, as I said earlier, that should have been the individual's rights anyway, that this is not even a matter of state rights at this point. Can't be, because the response from the state, if they are responsible, then their ability to respond is a matter of time. And when you can break down 8 seconds into that was 2 more lives lost, what is your response rate? A minute, 60 seconds, maybe 64 seconds, so we can keep the numbers even? 64 divided by 8 is 8, so 16 in 1 minute. And again, we do live in a society where there is really no telling the difference. The person was triggered is the best excuse that they have. Even when they're trying to figure out what the motive are, they say he was triggered. That's the bottom line. And triggered is the pun intended. What do you need? Foresight? Every weapon on the market, both private and public, omits a signal? Is that what you're referring to? And there's a governing chip that allows that signal to be deactivated so the firing pin no longer works? Is that what you're talking about? That? I know you're not talking confiscation. No, the weapons platforms, they get better. The bump stock gets even bumpier. The scope gets scopier. It's getting automated. I'll give it for instance. On one of the images, there was the MRAP. Now, the MRAP as a platform can logistically block a highway with itself block the highway. And inside of it, as its doors open, can be that automated, computerized, completely digital wind variants, all of that stuff to disable that incident a lot quicker than 30 minutes away. But the challenge would be is where is it, the one that's equipped to handle such an incident, and how long will it take to get it into position? And I think even with some of our best and most capable platforms or logistics platforms, you need at least 16 minutes. And that's even if Amazon is on the job. With their communications and information platform. So the MRAP may not be the best option. Its ability to be deployed, maybe too much. But what about those same systems that automate the Sentry and its computerized wind, variage, all of that? It's a stable platform to disable. That weapon system does it even exist? I'm pretty sure it does. I've seen it in the movies, right? Am I too in the movies? I'm thinking out loud, excuse me, but I'm thinking that cost may be a primary deterrent, that the government is not making enough money and that the treasury bill has to be inflated to like $10 10% again, excuse me. That they need to sell more T-bills just to get our society in a modern weapons system society, I guess. That, what do you call it? I guess that might be because I grew up watching the Jetsons and seeing the robots in the flying cars. And so I can see the flying car come and grab an MRAP and fly up and then transport it to a location. But doing it in less than 15 minutes, I cannot see that. And nor do I see the deployment of such MRAPs into locations, so many of them, that they are 15 minutes away from any conflict, even if we were to put the flying apparatuses and fully fund, Lockheed Martin, tax Lockheed Martin for, let's say 100,000 was the first number that came to mind, 100,000 flying short range transport drones, and you tax them, or you give them a loan backed by treasury bills, 10-year treasury bills for the 10, to cover the cost. What is the government? Does the government has to take out a loan, or the T-bills a loan in themselves? Anyway, however you got to fund it, make the shit happen. Seems like a very straightforward solution. I don't know if it goes to the appropriations committee, or it becomes an appropriations bill, or an itemized line item. I don't know if it's funneled to the Department of Defense or one of its subcommittees, or if it's a state thing. Because if you can't raise the funds for it, you have to already just agree that it's the people's then. No, the government is not going to be there to fund it. No, they're not going to tax Lockheed Martin and Boeing to produce 100,000 drones that are capable. Whoever creates that MRAP, how many of those would you need to have one at least within 15 minutes of responding to an active shooter scenario? Is it even necessary? Do you really want that commitment in the first place? Maybe it's not even the funding for it, but maybe there's other ideas that are out there on what is the more appropriate response from our government and our officials, from people like Greg Abbott. Is he asking for a financial commitment? And that financial commitment to do what? Is he saying, well, here in the great state of Texas, we have this many schools, and at this many schools, we will be deploying at least 2 armed assets to each of those schools, and their salaries are covered, and they come with this defense or this safety equipment package. And maybe they don't get an MRAP at every school, but there should be an MRAP capable of defending or reacting a lot faster than 15 minutes to every school. Especially if that MRAP is fully capable of shutting down or dismantling or moving forward. I saw this one on the bottom and I didn't know exactly what it referred to, A Wood 29. So it was one of those that actually made me stop and say, what's that? And it was like, oh, toast him. And so it was a call for the execution of, and I think it's also in concurrent with something that a previous tweeter had said. And it's also in line with that sentiment that said, if this was an African or African American, person of color, a minority, or Mexican, I think is what they really want to say. If they were Black or Mexican, and it is the race card, that they would have been executed by the police. There wouldn't have been and I think that that argument has some traction in some cases not. But all right, so this one got my attention. M. Smith, shout out to that on Twitter. That video wasn't good. Didn't see anything. Just heard gunshots. I wonder if someone else has a better video than that, or a better video that was closer to the action, and then the crying face, crying, laughing face. So it's the satire again. It's tragicomic because we're already conditioned for gun violence. That even our Boy Scouts, like 6 years old, I think they have to earn their merit badge by shooting like a higher powered BB gun. They have, or archery is another one that they can get. But weapon systems is something that our society is more than familiar with. And so this one was funny though. I still kind of laughed. That video wasn't good. Didn't see anything. Just heard the gunshots. I wonder if someone has a better video that was closer to the action. I mean, it's kind of funny. It was like, we can't be content. Like, we need more. Get in closer. Why are you still ducking? Like the person with the video camera. The person with the video camera is supposed to stand up. What are you ducking for? You're doing this for all of us. Be brave. Be heroic and get zoom in now or something. Get in there. Run in there. Like, why are you recording instead of fighting back against this person who is trying to take the lives of people? Are you ill prepared to do anything but record it? Are you ill prepared to do anything but have the conversation afterwards? But right there in the moment, as shocking as that will be for the rest of their life, I don't know how they get over it. I think even the celebrity of what they get from it is another one. So now it's almost like arousal now. It's in the emotional state of that person's psyche. Craig Mack just turns my stomach. Sick emoji. Or Craig Monk, excuse me. More interesting of the name. I even like the Monk. But it's flying the Texas Longhorns. Hooks. All right, Joe Smith II. Millions never commit crimes with their firearms. We all agree on that. How do we find the crazy ones? Nearly impossible in a country like ours. Yeah, see, again, you're trying to make it about crazy. So now it's instead of putting a chip in every firearm, now it's a chip in every mind, every person, every human being, or something that reads the brain waves of human beings and reports and beams that information, the brain waves. Kind of like you can have a Fitbit that can do everything with your heart and how many steps, and it can look inside your body. That technology exists. But are you asking to deploy it? And when you ask to deploy it, is it like deployed through like Popeye's chicken sandwiches or CVS vaccinations? And inside that vaccination, you get a chip? And how often do you have to replenish the chip? What does the chip look like? Like, if you're talking about isolating the crazy ones, then the only way to isolate the crazy ones is to first have some way of looking at everyone. When you say nearly impossible, I think you're referring to power, not to technology. Not like, oh, these dumb people don't know how to do it. I don't think that that's what Joe Smith II is referring to. I think that Joe Smith II is referring to the will to execute that, not existing within those who have the power to make that type of investment. So 365 million people get a chip. The chip probably cost about $7 total to make. Little pill form. I mean, if you let the movies tell it, they got bees that can watch and monitor bugs, birds. There are the ability of drones. We do know that that's there. We know about satellite radio feeds and all of that. We know about chips and all of that. It's there. So it's not impossible, but highly unlikely, like 99.9, and keep going with the nines, improbable. Somebody here, Mudville Music. So when they went into the story about the person who actively did it, I kind of avoided that, but they were talking about their past and they said adjudication was deferred. Doublespeak 4, well, golly, we don't think he represents an ongoing threat. Nice job, court system. Not. So some sarcasm again there. And sarcasm. I mean, but there's a lot of truth in what you're talking about. The adjudication was deferred. There may have been instances of your criminal record that ought not be used against you in your application for a firearm. Now, in some of these instances, on the other end, people are saying, well, you shouldn't even need an application to buy one. And that's a little bit too far. I think at the very minimum, you should have an application, right? I mean, even your digital receipt when you pay for it, even if you paid for it in cash, there is at some culpability that somebody sold it to you, somebody, and they absolve themselves of liability upon delivery of said product into the hands of that individual. So therefore, individual has the right to determine in any instances one way or the other, how they choose to defend their own property. This shit gets crazy, right? Because one of the big ideologies that we're up against is the ideology that says, well, all of America is my property, in the negative sense or the nefarious sense. Similarly, you can reverse that and say, inside of our communities, do you look at your community as your community? Do you own it? Do you say this is my space, that all the children here are our children? Do you have that collective ideology, or is it just a blatant individual? Because on either end of that spectrum, there's still the unabsolved or unresolved risks. I'm not going to be able to policy this thing away. You're not going to be able to, well, these people have a ban that make it hard for these people. And it would still be the responsibility, or it would still fall on and I'd put it on broadly on the shoulders of the men of your citizenry. It always comes back to that. And in that, the men then can, even in their own right, are their women included in protecting that needs to be protected? I tell you from my own personal experience, I believe that our African American or Black American descendant of slave as a part of our culture. Yes, there's never been a point in our living here in America where the women and even the children were not individually responsible for themselves, as well as individually responsible for the protection of others, their loved ones. It never rested on just the men of the African American descendant of slavery. It never rested on just the men to protect that was important to us. Now, there have been incidences where you'll see the men who take it upon themselves, men come together to try to protect, such as Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rosewood burning, and where men joined the military throughout the history, many, probably all wars, if you can say they served in some capacity or an adjacency to the war effort. Direct cause. I love to go into the history and have these conversations, but gun violence is going to be with us, and there's no way to avoid it. And when it comes to my talking points, or the multiple active shooter scenario, I still believe that there are some who have not lost that appetite to work together and move through an entire city together in a coordinated attack against, and this is the big fear, Black people. I can go on and say, and Asians, like 9/11. I mean, not 9/11, but like this day shall forever live in infamy. Pearl Harbor and the aftermath, that policy or that ideology. I remember reading when it was like, look at the direction that the barbed wires point, or that it was to keep the people safe on the inside and make it harder for those who would have really taken some vigilante justice against those Japanese people. And I know it's happened so many times throughout history where you can see that invading militia type of movement, and no, in those cases, not everyone is the shooter. And most likely, it's not as organized, it's not as militant. But when it is, and they do come after the Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black Wall Street, for any of those who are not familiar with that reference, there's a lot of them. And even in the 60s, there were some episodes where that could have went real bad. And I think even in those instances, the men who were on the triggered side decided, rather than turning their gun, they turned with sticks, and they used the government as its apparatus, as a weapon, and they used fire trucks with water hoses that shot that water so hard it would rip the skin off your body. And they used that against peaceful protesters, demonstrators, American citizens, and such. I brought out one of the talking points from Ronald Reagan a little bit earlier too. And I know I'm on a longer rant here because of the top one. Sister put some information in there, or looks like she could be a sister anyway, but it got my attention and it deserved to be at least responded to. But Ronald Reagan referred to, if you want to not have mass for, his conclusion was, you got to lock up all the thugs and the criminals. And so as we scroll down, how do we find the crazy ones? What the hell do you consider a thug? And I think it also goes into the xenophobic immigrants. Lock up all the immigrants. Thus the reference to Pearl Harbor. Lock them all up. Ban on Muslim countries. Don't allow any more to come in. So catch this. And if they're attempting to buy a firearm, they should at least have an application. I don't think that's too much to ask. But Mudville Music says adjudication was deferred because there's sometimes where even the criminal record ought not be what throws you away. He said it's doublespeak for, well, golly, don't think he represents an ongoing threat. Or in those instances inside of our system where things are expunged or we don't need to give him the full sentence, or we're not going to give him, 18 months, or maybe it can go to probation, or maybe the case is not worth prosecuting in itself. Whatever those things that may have been in the active shooter from yesterday's criminal record, or from the other day rather. And Sunday was where the law passed. But saying that if they no longer represent a threat, then now they're in a position to either buy their weapons or sell weapons even, or, just have them in general. And now they've regained their right to defend themselves. True North SNF. Where were all the good guys with guns to stop this guy? NRA said that would solve the problem. It's almost like their logic is flawed. I love the sarcasm there. I love the ownership or the accountability there. The people who are using these as talking points, and the people who have the most to gain from selling more guns, selling more bullets through Walmart. These folks are not going to be held accountable. And you're not going to tax them or give them a loan or offer them a treasury bill, of a 10-year treasury bill at 10% in order to start paying for the solution that even governors like Greg Abbott have recommended, and that I gave a couple of ideas on when it comes to what that armory looks like. That mobile shed needs to be automated, and it needs to be smart. It needs to have those little lock pins in it to where you can come in just like a locker, open it up, these things that exist. But to move that out of the police station and into our public schools, that should be at least a conversation. Like, instead of a PTA inside of the cafeteria with graham crackers and orange juice, will we be having the next PTA meeting at the gun range together? Is that the kind of PTA they have? And the president of that PTA is the one who says, well, just had to verify, trust but verify, and big stick, and see if you're really a disciplinarian, and I have to know that our children are safe with you. But what they never really go into is, what does the NRA actually pledge? What do they commit when it comes to gun safety in schools? Is it the piece of paper with the pictures on it that tells you in the event of an active shooter, here are the steps, and they'll post some of those on the walls? Maybe they'll get them blown up big. Do they cover the printing costs for the active shooter scenario evacuation maps that need to go inside of the stairwells of any school that has more than one floor? The directions to the natural disaster shelter? Do they have green zones, safe zones? Have they identified them on the map? Are they available? Whose job is it to make that information available? Do you know where your green zones are? I don't know where my green zones are in my own city. I guess I would be one of those people who have to make it up and do it yourselves and figure it out. But to have to be retroactive is something that scares me. Just like the need to have to be active in the first place. Essentially, I'm Black, but nobody will see veteran, and even Black veterans can get a hard time. They would only see the AR, and they wouldn't know which side he was fighting on in the first. And that's white people to Black people too. Not being able to tell the difference if people are shooting, which one's the good guy, which one's the bad guy, is a risk, an unmitigated risk. And now you're saying put those all throughout the city or all throughout the community, or as long as it's outside in the parking lot. A sense of entitlement and gun fueled by a racist president. I don't know how they jumped there, but that's interesting. I've heard it said, but I'm still not personally able to draw the connection. His rhetoric is infuriating white people. Those white people that he was infuriating, I don't think were infuriated by him. I think they may have connected with something else that infuriated them. And the fact that he is here is, I don't know, emboldening them, maybe? I don't know. But even then, having that conversation or saying the president is some form of accountable or responsible for it, I don't know. I think only the best solution would be, what are the federal things that you would like to see? And on that note, there were three that we pulled out earlier. If there are any landowners and property owners who own land and multiple tracts of land here in America that are telling American citizens that for any other odd reason that would be eligible to purchase and own and have their firearms, but there are landowners who are prohibiting them from being able to exercise that right, then that should be a federal ban against those landowners. Bottom line. I think that's a more legitimate and tangible ask. And even that one, again, as I bring it out, it still speaks to the man in a household who says that somebody who lives 3,000 miles away can tell you that you can't have your protection in your home, where your children have to go to bed at night and where your wife depends on you for her protection, or where you all depend on each other. Because in some households, I believe that the whole household has a responsibility, whether it's ringing the alarm, you call 911, you get the other kids ready, but that's something that should be the households to determine. I don't know. It's interesting. But how many households are actually prepared? I guess that number would be another question. And what do you know what prepared means? How do you even evaluate or measure prepared? What is prepared? Anyway, that could go so deep, but I like this last one. I am so heartbroken. This wasn't supposed to be happening. My thoughts and prayers are with the families who lost loved ones and who are injured. That's a big one. It's a very standard social media expression that connects you to those folks. It shows the compassion and the heart that is needed amongst more Americans. Say this isn't the best. So I actually clicked on this one as well. Mitch Warm. We also have this story that the media is not covering. Crime scenes do not cross. At least 10 teens injured in shooting at Alabama high school football. Um, that one kind of struck me home because Alabama, I'm thinking of African Americans. And then it says football. I was a football coach. And so I went to that story. It said at least 10 teens were injured Friday night after a shooting at a high school football game in Alabama, police said. Gunfire broke out at the Land Peoples Stadium in Mobile, Alabama, after a game between LaFleur and Williamson high schools had ended. Police said the victims, all between the ages of 15 and 18, were taken to local hospitals, according to the outlet. About half of them are in critical condition with non-life-threatening injuries. Authorities said later Saturday morning that they arrested D'Angelo Parnell, which sounds like a Black name, 17, in connection with the shooting. Parnell is charged with 9 counts of attempted murder, police told WKRG, who was local and did the reporting. Excuse me. Authorities said later Saturday morning that they arrested D'Angelo Parnell. Stood out to me because it was a black name. And I think that the argument that they were even making was, don't forget that black people are killing people too. I think it was the information needed to fuel those folks who like to use the don't, what about Chicago type arguments, or those who say, well, gang violence is so random, or they like to use that. They like to make it about another story, or they like to paint it black. It happens. There are those type of folks out there. And if it wasn't racial based, maybe they did just have a heart that they wanted to bring out the information that there was a shooting. They didn't have any condolences or nothing like that, nothing standard, just putting it out there. Police are questioning witnesses. So it takes a different tone too in like places like Alabama and such, and in certain contexts. So while one is the FBI is coming out with conclusive belief systems that it wasn't white supremacy, it wasn't connected to a domestic terrorist group or an international terrorist group, and that this individual was acting solo. So just different levels of forensic investigation that are deployed based on the context. So they put out the information that says this isn't all white people. This isn't just a white men are now shooting more. There's no connection there to the other mass shootings. They weren't all connected in Charlottesville, and they all didn't attend with the tiki torch, and they didn't plan on at some point becoming active. They don't have a back chat or a group me. They're not connected through some Stormfront web page or social media. These are individuals who are just triggered. So they come out to paint the narrative that not all white people, and this person comes on to say, well, here's another story. And when you dive into it, you can see why D'Angelo. They're quicker to put out the name, I would say. They're quicker to put out the images locally. Than when it is like a mass shooting. Quicker to put out hearsay. Witnesses said a fight broke out in the stands several minutes before the game ended, but it is unclear whether the fight had anything to do with the gunfire. So there was a fight at a high school football game. I think that's probably more common, or more common than, I don't know. I think it's pretty common, I would say. Not like the majority of the time at a high school football game, no, but I think that there may be a percentage or a couple of basis points of a likelihood of a fight happening at a high school football game. I don't think it's 1% of high school football games there's a fight, just like I don't think it's even 1% of a high school football game fights end in shootings. So maybe the context was 10 people who were shot, I guess. Multiple active shooting scenarios, or active shooting victim scenarios, I guess was their point. Something that they said stood out. Why are the young people bringing this type of violence to public events? Young people, what do you mean? The old motherfuckers been doing this since been doing it since the invention of gunpowder. What do you mean us bringing this type of violence? I think even before the invention of gunpowder, the chariots or whatever it is, violent conflict. Or maybe they're saying, why didn't they handle it somewhere else? Why didn't you take that somewhere else? As if that's a good compromise. I mean, it's better than doing it right there in front of the children, but said the ages were between 15 and 18. These are the children. And in many cases, these are the children who would also be called to go get their strap out the armory or out of their truck, their rifle, their shotgun, We are not going to let them come in here and mass murder our students. But even then, even to go to the truck, when you're talking about 8 seconds, the truck is too far. Uneven keel. The US now knows that their elected Republican officials are not about to do one single thing to solve gun violence. I would disagree. I think they put a list of about 8 that they would like to address. Only 3 of them I really liked on a more federal level. I live in Phoenix, so Phoenix probably better consider similar. They have a similar demographic and makeup to some of the communities that have been hit by some of these by these latest events. Um, the people in those demographics, the targets, in some cases, not as random as this most recent event, but definitely in the Walmart shooting in the Ohio, you can cut the tension with a butter knife, rather, when it comes to the racial tension that's underneath there or the underlying sentiment. It's there. Damn, America, are y'all okay over there? Says Lily. And then somebody else posted the meme, 0 days since our last shooting. Big Dale, a person with a concealed carry weapon would be the answer to these types of attacks. Stop them in their tracks ASAP. And again, that's about heroism that I see right there. You're still assuming that people will be bolder and that they will be accurate, trained, that they can actually hit their target and that they aren't mistaken for the bad guy or a bad guy or as a part of the bad incident, that they're not making it worse by then trying to shoot. Imagine jumping out in the middle of the street trying to just unload a clip on this person driving up the street. 4 men like Tombstone just step out in the middle of the street, or the old mafia or mob style movies. They just walk out with Tommy guns and shit and try to stop that car where it is, or they rush to that arm ramp or there's an overpass and 4 concerned men see the car coming by and they heard it on the news and the helicopter and they ran out there and tried to shoot at the car while it was speeding on the freeway. Maybe they get shot at and maybe they get targeted specifically, and they have to confront them, or maybe they're unsuccessful and the car keeps going, or maybe the person is not in the car, or whatever the event may be, or wherever this scenario may be, movie theater or whatever it is. The men of those community try to stop them. They don't wait for the police, because 8 seconds later or 64 seconds later or 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes later, time is not on their side. Somebody said Seth is such an obvious douche name too. Like sometimes they just get there. Somebody else said, "Don't look Mexican at me." That is so freaking satirical. Not hilarious, but it's almost there. When you have Maniac as the commander in chief in the White House, what do you expect? So somebody called him a maniac. President, again, prayers of the righteous will not be forsaken. In peace.